He found her half dead in the desert, begging him not to lift the cloth. When he did, his hands would not stop shaking. The noon sun pressed the plain flat. Heat wavered, turning distance into water that was not there. A horse stood with its head low, reins trailing, saddle dark with sweat. Hale took the last rise slow and saw her by a dead mesquite, a small shape under a torn, blood-dark wrap. Flies stitched the air. Wind had no interest. He slid from the saddle and let the reins fall. The ground cracked under his boots. She breathed, but thin. Sand clung to her lips, to the grease of old blood. Her wrists were banded where rope had worked, the marks clean like a cruel bracelet. The cloth hid everything else. "Leave it," she said. Not loud. A sound made out of gravel and need. "Please, don't." He knelt beside her. The horse shifted, iron clinked once, and went still. Hale reached for the canteen, wet the corner of his bandana, and wiped her mouth in small strokes, the way you calm a skittish foal. Her eyes tracked his hand. They held no plea for mercy. Only rules. Do not. The cloth had been wound tight, then torn, then wound again by someone who did not care if the knots held or failed. Flies found the cracks anyway. He could smell rust and salt and something burnt that shouldn't be burnt. "Water," he said. He lifted her head. She drank in swallows that learned how to be careful. When she finished, she licked the rim like a habit. He looked at the wrap, then away, then back. This was not the place for doctoring. Coyotes knew noon like a clock. Men with bad ideas knew tracks like a ledger. The wind held nothing, but the sand did. A heel print with a crescent chip. Facing her, facing him now. He set his palm on the print and smeared it. He breathed once, twice. He slid his knife under the first knot and lifted the cloth, slow as gospel. "Don't," she said again. The word fell between them like a coin. Not enough to buy anything. Enough to count. He cut, not because he wanted to, but because a man who carries a person must know what he is carrying. The wrap opened. His hands stopped being his. Across her ribs, just under the left breast, skin had been branded with a mark no woman should carry. Not letters for cattle, letters for men. A badge number scorched into flesh, the edges blistered and cracked. Over it, someone had carved 2 more lines with a knife, crude and deep, crossing the brand like a denial that did not take. Near the hip, older scars had healed as straight as the edge of a ledger, the kind hands can make when they have only rope and reason. Hale's fingers shook so hard, the knife point scratched a thin, useless crescent in the cloth. He set the blade down. He put both hands flat on dirt until they remembered the ground. She stared past him at the sky. She did not cover herself. Shame lived in other rooms. "You shouldn't have," she whispered. He swallowed. Words stayed stuck. He reached for the canteen again instead, poured water over a clean strip of his shirt, laid it on the brand without pressure. Steam rose where it had no right to. She did not cry out. Her jaw tightened and let go. "Who did this?" he asked, and the question sounded strange in the heat, like a man trying to borrow a voice. "Law," she said, "no more." He looked at the heel print again, at the clean chip in the leather, at the way the toes faced the place where her breath had slowed down to 1 per minute to save itself. He had seen a boot like that before. In town. Propped lazy at a bar. Badge turned just so to catch a lamp. He rewound the cloth in a cleaner shape and tied it with a gentler knot. He slid his arms under her. She was lighter than the scene made her look. He felt heat along his forearms from the brand through the wrappings. He lifted slow, stood, and set her across the saddle like a person, not a sack. The horse flicked an ear and braced to take the weight. He walked beside them. Step, breath, step. The horizon did not move, so he moved for both of them. When she stirred, he tilted the canteen again. When she slept, he watched her breath trip and catch and keep going anyway. He kept to the flats where wind lies to tracks. He cut through stone where a horse leaves less story. The line shack sat low in a fold of the land, a box of boards that had learned how to be shade. He shouldered the door. The room smelled of dry wood and emptiness. A small stove waited like a dog who knows the sound of a match. Hale unrolled a blanket, set her on it, and went to the well. Rope, bucket. The wheel groaned once and settled to work. He brought water like it was fire and set it near the bed. He boiled what needed boiling. He tore what needed tearing. He washed his hands the way a man does when he knows the next touch matters more than any he has made all week. He unwound the cloth again, this time where walls and a roof could help. The brand looked angrier in shade. The cut lines had crusted in the wrong way. He cleaned them with small circles from inside out, the way he had been taught by a woman long dead who made rules and saved boys. She watched him watch the mark. "If you tell," she said, "they'll finish it." "I won't," he said, and heard he had earned no right to say it yet. He laid carbolic on a rag, waited until the heat softened from cruel to necessary, and pressed. Her breath hit his wrist like a bird that had hit a window and found glass where sky should be. He held the cloth until the hiss became a steady sound. At the table, he found a scrap of board and a pencil in a tin. He wrote nothing. He drew a line that rose a little at the end and set the board above the door frame without nails. Houses like to think first. She drank again. She watched the door. She did not ask where the nearest road ran. She did not ask if the sheriff rode this way. She asked for a needle, and her voice found a small surety when she said it, like a hand finding something familiar in the dark. He handed her the needle and a length of thread. She did not stitch the cloth that had failed her. She stitched the edge of the blanket so it would not fray. The work calmed the room. Outside, the wind dropped the pretense of sound and left them to their own. He checked her hands. The rope burns had scabbed in tidy rings. He dabbed them, wrapped them with clean muslin, tied square knots that would not slip. She flexed once, testing the truth of the binding. He nodded, not to be thanked, just to mark that the job had been done to a standard. When the light started to thin, he stepped out. The horse drank. Hale walked the edge of the wash, eyes on the places where men like to leave news. He found it. A bottleneck snapped off and pressed into mud. 2 boot prints, one heel chipped like a sickle moon, the other heavier, toe scuffed from a habit of dragging. They had stood and watched, and then they had gone. He smoothed what he could and took the rest inside in his head. She sat up when he came in. She had pinned her hair back with a splinter from the kindling box. She had pulled the blanket to the ribs and knotted it in a way that let her breathe and still be covered. Her eyes had color again. Not much. Enough. He set beans to simmer with a mean pinch of salt and a meaner piece of pork that the shack had forgotten. He watched the pot until the first steam found a way out. He took down 2 tin cups and a spoon that had been hammered flat by a man who needed it to do more than it wanted to do. He set the cup near her hand. She took it. The spoon rang the rim, a small bell that called no one. "Name," he said, "because a person should be called something other than pain." She looked at the ceiling for a second, like it might help. "Ruth," she said, and swallowed the word like it had been heavy to carry. He nodded once and set the word beside the mark in his mind. Ruth. Badge numbers. Boot heel. A line on a board. They ate slow. She took small bites, testing the fact of food as if it might lie. He cut the pork in half and then cut his half in half and traded without saying so. She noticed and split hers down the line and slid it back so the ledger would balance. After, he washed the cup with a pinch of sand until the tin shone in a thin, honest way. He set it mouth down so dust could not write in it overnight. When dusk folded itself into the corners, he lit the lamp and turned the flame down to a kind star. He left the door on the latch and the window on a crack. The stove took a small log and learned to hold it. She lay on the blanket with her back to the wall this time, not to the door. He spread his bedroll near the stove with his boots in a pair like a promise. He set his rifle where his hand could find it without thinking. He did not look at it twice. He looked at the board over the door instead, at the little line that rose at the end, at the empty place where a nail might go if the house agreed. Outside, the country practiced the sound of night. Coyotes tried a joke and failed. A bird said something final and then believed it. Wind ran a finger along the shack and quit. "Don't tell," she said, voice small only from the room, not from her. "Not until I can stand." He watched the lamp's wick. "I won't," he said. The word sat down and made itself heavier, so it would not be blown over later. He closed his eyes and opened them again. The mark flashed on the back of his lids like a brand put there too. He felt the shake start up again and set his palm flat on the floor until wood steadied it. He counted breaths like posts down a fence line until he reached sleep, and sleep reached back. In the dark, he woke once to the small sound of the needle. She was stitching again, thread in and out, keeping an edge from unraveling. It was not the cloth this time. It was the day. At dawn, the line shack wore a ring of cool. He stoked the stove, poured water, cut the last heel of bread. He stepped to the door and put 2 fingers to the board like a man who marks the height of a child. He did not look back when he said, "We ride at first light." Ruth sat up slow, the blanket still knotted, the brand under it hot and quiet for the moment. She touched the bandage at her wrist, then the edge of the door, then the board. She nodded once, not to him, but to the work. Outside, a boot with a crescent chip pressed new into the dust and then walked away from the shack. Hale saw it. He took the stirrup and mounted anyway. He led the horse to the door. He picked her up and felt the heat through the wrap and did not flinch. She settled across the saddle like a fact the day would have to carry. They moved. The sun learned how to be cruel again. Distance unrolled. Behind them, the shack sank back into its low trust of land. Ahead of them, the line of the horizon did not change, so they did. The trail stretched like a scar, endless and pale. Hale kept the horse to a steady walk. Every jolt risked tearing the woman back into pain. She leaned against the saddle horn, breath catching with each sway, eyes fixed on nothing but the road ahead. The cloth he had retied clung to her ribs. The heat made it damp. He could see where blood tried to return, pressing through the threads. His hand hovered near her, not touching, just ready, as though he could catch pain before it fell. She said nothing for a long time. Only the creak of leather and the rhythm of hooves kept them from being swallowed whole by silence. Finally, her voice cracked against the stillness. "You should have left me." Hale kept his eyes on the horizon. "Not my way." Her laugh was short, hollow. "You'll regret it. Everyone does." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the canteen again, lifting it toward her lips. She drank, slow, but her eyes stayed fixed on him now, sharper than the words she'd given. They crossed a dry riverbed, the horse stumbling once on loose rock. Hale steadied the reins, his arm brushing hers by accident. She tensed at the touch, every muscle stiff, then forced herself to relax, like a cornered animal choosing not to spring. When they climbed back onto the plain, he broke the silence. "Ruth, you said the law did this." Her jaw tightened. "Not law, men who wear it." Hale's hand tightened on the reins. He knew what that meant. Not bandits, not drifters. Deputies, maybe worse. Men who carried iron not to keep order, but to make their own. They rode until the sun leaned west. The sky stretched long shadows across the plain, making the land look carved by giants. Hale found a patch of cottonwoods near a narrow stream bed where water still clung to rock. He slid her down from the saddle, catching her before her legs gave out. "You walk?" he asked. She shook her head. He carried her again, setting her gently against a tree where shade cooled the ground. He pulled a blanket from the saddlebag, draped it over her shoulders, and crouched to start a fire. When the sparks caught, she whispered, "You don't even know me." "Don't have to," he said, breaking dry wood for the flames. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you don't know what they'll do if they find me with you." He stirred the fire with a stick. The flames bent and shifted, catching more with every breath. "I've had men after me before," he said. "They bled the same as any." For the first time, she looked at him without suspicion, just tired, hollow, a little softer. She tugged the blanket tighter and leaned against the tree, her eyes closing even though the fight in her said not to. Hale watched the dark creep across the sky. He saw the crescent moon rise, sharp as the chip in that heel print. He thought of the mark burned into her flesh, the kind of cruelty that doesn't fade when the skin does. His hands shook again, so he held them over the fire until the flames steadied them. Behind them, the land waited. Ahead, he knew, the men with badges would not stop waiting either. But Ruth was still breathing, and as long as she was, so was he. The morning came gray. Thin light cut through the branches, painting the ground in cold lines. Hale stirred the embers of the fire, pushing half-burned sticks until flame rose again. He glanced toward Ruth. She hadn't moved much. Only the rise and fall of her chest told him she still clung to the thread between night and day. When her eyes opened, they were hard. Not weak. Hard. She tried to sit without his help, but her body betrayed her. He caught her elbow, steadying her until she could lean against the tree. She pulled away, quick, as if his touch burned. "Why?" she asked. Hale didn't answer at first. He poured water into a tin cup, held it out. She took it, though her fingers trembled. "You could have left me," she said. "I didn't." She studied him like he was another wound, waiting to see if it would fester. Her hand shifted to the edge of the cloth again. He saw the fear in her knuckles, white from gripping too tight. "They took everything," she said, voice thin but sharp. "My name, my family, my skin. Then they left me in dirt for crows." Hale looked at her, steady. "Not everything. You're still here." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She stared at him, searching for mockery, but found none. Slowly, she lowered her gaze. They broke camp as the sun climbed. Ruth leaned against the saddle as Hale lifted her up again. The horse shifted, uneasy, but Hale steadied it with a hand on its neck. They rode north, toward higher land where grass whispered over stone. By noon, her voice returned. "They'll come, not for me, out of pride. Can't let anyone see they failed." Hale nodded. "Let them." "You don't understand," she said. "They wear badges. Folks will take their side." "I've seen men like that," Hale said, his eyes fixed ahead. "Badges don't make their blood run cleaner." For the first time, her breath caught on a sound close to laughter. Bitter, quiet, but real. They reached a ridge by dusk, the valley below scattered with cattle herds and thin smoke from distant camps. Hale chose a hollow between rocks, hidden from sight, where they could rest again. He laid her down, gave her jerky softened with water. She chewed slow, as though every bite was a battle. When the stars spread wide, Ruth whispered, "You'll regret this." Hale sat across the fire, rifle laid across his lap. He shook his head. "Maybe." She pulled the blanket tighter, eyes closing once more. For the first time, her shoulders eased. The fight in her wasn't gone, but it bent, just enough to rest. Hale watched the flames lick the dark. He thought of her words, of the cloth still tied to her ribs, and of the tremor in his hands when he first saw what men had carved into her. He had no answers for her scars, only the choice to keep riding. And in the silence of the ridge, that choice was enough. The wind picked up that night, cold, dry, full of grit. It rattled the brush and carried faint echoes across the ridge. Hale kept the fire small, only a glow hidden between rocks. He didn't sleep. The rifle lay in reach, his ears tuned for the crunch of boots or hooves. Ruth stirred, restless. She turned on her side, staring at him through the dim light. "You waitin' for them?" she said, her voice hoarse. "I am." She pulled the cloth tighter. "You'll die for nothing." Hale's gaze stayed on the dark horizon. Better here than watching them finish what they started. Her breath caught, shallow, then steadied. For the first time, she didn't argue. Near dawn, the sound came. Hooves on stone. Voices, faint but close enough to carry. Hale crouched, finger brushing the trigger. He saw them at the far edge of the ridge. 3 riders, moving slow, lantern swinging from a saddle horn. Searching. Ruth's hand clutched the ground. She pressed her lips together, fighting the panic rising in her chest. Hale leaned close. "Stay low." The riders passed below, shadows against the paling sky. One raised the lantern high, scanning the ridge. Hale didn't breathe. Neither did she. Only when they moved on, fading into distance, did he let his lungs draw air again. Ruth trembled, her knuckles pressed to her mouth. Hale poured water into the cup, set it beside her without a word. She stared at him, then drank, the tremor in her hands spilling drops down her chin. By midday, they moved again. The valley opened, dotted with dry wells and the skeletons of old homesteads. Hale rode slow, letting the horse pick its path. Ruth sat stiff, her eyes never leaving the horizon. At one abandoned shack, Hale stopped. The roof sagged, boards splintered, but it gave shelter from open sky. Inside, dust coated the floor, and a broken chair leaned against the wall. He spread a blanket on the ground. She lowered herself, wincing with every movement. When she looked up, her eyes held something different. Not trust, not yet, but less fear. "You keep running," she said softly. "A man can't outrun what waits in him." Hale met her gaze, his jaw set hard. I'm not running." Silence held between them. Then she nodded, almost too slight to see, and leaned back against the wall. That night, as the stars burned sharp, Hale sat outside the shack, rifle across his knees. Ruth lay inside, still clutching the cloth to her chest. She didn't beg him anymore. She didn't ask him to leave. And in the hollow of that ruined home, with danger circling just beyond the dark, the first fragile thread of something else began to take hold. Morning came pale and brittle. The shack's boards let in shafts of cold light. Ruth shifted slowly, her breath uneven. The cloth at her chest was damp again. Hale saw it spreading, dark against her skin. He knew it couldn't stay covered forever. He crouched, voice low. "Let me see." She shook her head. "No. You'll die if I don't." Her eyes closed, a tear slipping from the corner. Then, without a word, she loosened her grip. Hale peeled the cloth back. His hands shook before he even saw the wound. Her body was a map of pain, cuts, burns, skin marked by ropes that had torn deep, but it was her chest that made his breath catch, a brand, fresh and raw, burned into her flesh, the mark of men who thought they owned her. Ruth turned her face away. "Now you see." Hale pressed his hand over his mouth. The rage rose slow, heavy. He wanted to go back to the ridge, to hunt them down, every last one. Instead, he tore strips from his own shirt, cleaned the burns as best he could, and wrapped her tight. His hands were steady now. When he finished, she whispered, "Why?" He looked at her a long time. "'Cause no one deserves to be left like that, not you." Her lips parted, but no words came. Only a sound, almost a sob, quickly swallowed. They stayed in the shack 3 more days. Hale went out for water, for wood, always coming back before dark. He never asked about her past, and she never asked about his. Yet, in the silence, something grew. A weight shared, not spoken. On the last evening, she sat by the doorway, cloth finally folded on the floor beside her. Her hair caught the firelight. She looked out across the land, endless and harsh. "You could leave me here," she said. "I could." She turned her head, meeting his eyes. "But you won't." He didn't answer. He only set another log on the fire. At dawn, they left together. The horse carried them slow across the valley, away from the shack, away from the riders who would never stop searching. Neither spoke of what came next, yet the silence between them was no longer empty. It held the fragile shape of something not yet named, something that for the first time neither of them wanted to run from.